قتل ایک خنجر سے لہو حسین کا پوچھا بہن کی چادر سے کیے ہیں شمر نے غریب زہرا وہیں روتے روتے مر جاتا غریب زہرا وہیں روتے روتے مر جاتا بہن اٹھا کے نہ لاتی جو لاش اکبر سے کیے ہیں شمر نے کسی نے بالوں سے پکڑا کوئی اٹھا کے چلا سر حسین کو مارا کسی نے پتھر سے کیے ہیں شمر نے لبے حسین پہ ہنس ہنس کے مارتا تھا چھڑی لبے حسین پہ ہنس ہنس کے مارتا تھا چھڑی یزید کھیل رہا تھا یزید کھیل رہا تھا حسین کے سر سے کیے ہیں شمر نے دو قتل ایک خنجر سے لہو حسین کا پوچھا بہن کی چادر سے کیے ہیں شمر نے صلوات.
Designated speaker for tonight, I'd like to Brother Imran. Bar Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawat.
دو چار اشعار ہدیہ بی بی سیدہ کی بارگاہ میں. رنگی ہے خون سے کرب و بلا دور دور تک رنگی ہے خون سے کرب و بلا دور دور تک قاسم کو لے گئی ہے قضا دور دور تک غازی کہاں کہاں سے اٹھائے حسین غازی کہاں کہاں سے اٹھائے تجھے حسین بکھرا ہوا ہے لاشا راہ دور دور تک لالا کے شامیوں نے گرائے حسین پر لالا کے شامیوں نے گرائے حسین پر پتھر نہ کوئی رنگ میں بچا دور دور تک رنگی ہے خون سے کرب و بلا دور دور تک اکبر کی لاش تک کبھی اصغر کی لاش تک شبیر کوہنیوں پہ چلا دور دور تک رنگی ہے خون سے کرب و بلا دور دور تک چلتا تھا شمر بالوں سے تھامے سر حسین چلتا تھا شمر بالوں سے تھامے سر حسین گردن سے خون بہتا گیا دور دور تک رنگی ہے خون سے کرب و بلا دور دور تک بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
Jazakallah for a heart-touching kalam. I'd like to request Surah Al-Fatiha for the marhameen of the sponsors of tonight's Majlis. And with this, I'd like to invite Dr. Shabbir Kirmani to deliver the speech for tonight. Can everyone please move up? Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
فاتحة. بسم الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأوحينا إلى أم موسى أن أرضعيه صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل. My respected brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Massachusetts or across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the importance of the family structure in Islam? We embarked on a journey and a conversation a few nights ago, and we're in full force on that conversation about essentially the future of our community. What's the path or the paths in front of us, and how is it that we can choose the path that is optimal, the best path for the future of our community? And last night we talked about the concept of freedom. And sometimes understanding Islam and the dimensions of Islam that are vital are very important. And to understand them, we sometimes have to re-understand, re-investigate, reacquaint ourselves with our own religion. The reality is that the same way that one never goes through the same river twice, we may never experience the same religion or understanding of the same religion twice. The idea being that the river may be the same, but we should have changed. I'll give you an example. I remember in college, I used to take some, I was taking the classes like a lot of you guys took. One of my favorite classes was physics. And so I would take supplemental courses. And so one of the supplemental courses I would take was I just liked the professor's style more, and I could speed up his lectures. So it helped me, was Yale University, Professor Shankar. He was teaching physics. And he said a line which I'll never forget. And he said, I've been teaching physics for, 30 years, 3 decades. He's gone through undergrad, grad, and all that, and he's teaching. And he said, my understanding of the fundamental Newtonian mechanics, like the basics of, F equals ma, force is equal mass times acceleration. My understanding today is worlds apart from what it was 30 years ago. Did that equation change? That equation's been around 400 years. What changed? His understanding of something, his depth of something. Similarly, when you come to this nuance and understanding, the book of God, the Quran, which the Ahlul Bayt invite us to, the Prophet himself says, I left behind 2 weighty things and I'm leaving behind 2 weighty things. The book of Allah, the Quran, and my itra, the Ahlul Bayt, right? And so when these 2 things come forward, my understanding of the Quran, is it the same? People who dabble in the financial markets, investing and the likes, their understanding of the markets today and their understanding of the markets over a decade and a century and 50 years of life is totally different. What Buffett may have seen in the markets is different than what you and I may have seen in the markets. What Dalio talks about at Bridgewater is a different world. He talks about going back to 500 years to figure out what's happened, what are the themes. So now, what does this have to do with our conversation today? One of the things that we have to think about when it comes to the future of our community is the family structure. And this includes how we can get back to its essence, its important, its vital nature, as well as how we can have harmonious relationships, good relationships, loving relationships, compassionate relationships. I say this because in our world, sometimes we have a misunderstanding of religion. Broader society does. And sometimes we get impacted by it. I'll ask you a question. Do you think our environment impacts us? Do you think where we live impacts us? Do you think the time of day impacts us? Do you know about cognitive biases? We're in Boston, right? You know about these. You ship a lot of these ideas to parts of the world, right? And so the idea being, there's some biases that we have that are conscious, and some biases that we have that are unconscious. So remember, I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to give you another set of tools right now that will help you in the rest of the lecture series and also in your life. Knowledge can broadly be categorized into 3 things. This will help you in your finance and business and life, and also spirituality. There's things that you know that you know. You know hopefully your name, date of birth, things like that. You know them. You know your address. Then there's things that you know you don't know. Right? Those are that's when you know the limits of your knowledge, right? So I know that I have a friend or a relative or a cousin who needs a surgery done, let's say a cardiovascular surgery or something. I know that I may not be the guy to do it, and I don't know how to do it, but somebody does. Somebody does. I know that I really enjoy and I love biryani. I have no clue how to make it. But I know there's someone, thank goodness, who knows how to. Zanzibari, Pakistani, Bombay, take your pick. The principle being, I know the limits. But then there's a third category of knowledge, which is called what you don't know that you don't know. Unknown unknowns. And so what's an example of that? In the back. Brothers? What's something you don't know you don't know? Unknown unknowns. Yeah, you don't know. Otherwise it would be in one of the other two categories, right? The principle being, in Islamic philosophy, these are categorized as knowledge. These categories of the first is what you know that may be ilm. But then there's other two. There's things that are two forms of ignorance. One is jahl al-basit and jahl al-murakkab. Jahl al-basit is simple ignorance. What I know that I don't know. And then there's jahl al-murakkab, which is compound ignorance. What I don't know that I don't know. What's more dangerous? Compound ignorance, right? Jahl al-murakkab. It's like the blind spot. You ever driven a car? Today we have a lot of fancy technology that will tell us if someone's in. But if you ask your parents, they'll tell you there was a time where they'll tell you, hey, check. You have to get, not only do you have to look in your rearview mirrors, you got to check and turn your head to make sure there's no one in your blind spot. There were no sensors and radar, none of that. There was no lights to flash off and tell you that somebody's in your blind spot. And the importance of that is if you don't know your blind spot, it can hurt you. You can get in trouble. You can get hurt really badly. Similarly, in the Islamic domain, we've had a rich tradition of thinkers and philosophers, and they've categorized things accordingly. That there's some things that we don't know. So now, coming to this, how does this relate to our world? We sometimes, you may hear in narratives in our communities, on the pulpit, in the mimbar, in good intent, by the way, that may be misinformed. I'll give you an example. Books, right? One of my favorite books is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which you may have read, by Dr. Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, although he's just a psychologist. And it talks about the system 1 and system 2 of the brain, Thinking Fast and Slow. But I'm not going to talk about his first book. I'm talking about his second book, which is called Noise. And in that book, they start off with an interesting example. And this will help you if you're trying to apply to the Harvards, MITs, Wellesley's, and the likes. Before you go, check the weather. So they did a study where they got two groups of students who were applying to elite universities in America. And the two groups, their statistics, their test scores, their grades, their extracurriculars, their X, Y, and Z were the same. So on paper, these individuals were the same. The only difference perhaps was the name. And even that was controlled for in the studies. And so these individuals were set up with interviews with the interviewees at the institution that they were applying to, and ultimately they were to get one of two results: admit or not admit, granted acceptance or not accepted, admission or not admission, right? And what did they find? They found that consistently one group was consistently accepted and admitted, and one group was consistently not admitted, not permitted, not granted acceptance, not granted admission. Do you know what was different? The only thing that was different in the study that the researchers controlled for was the weather. If it was sunny outside, they got accepted. If it was raining, they got denied. Now, when they asked the interviewers, the people who were asking the questions, why did you accept this person and not accept this person? They said, well, this reason, that reason, but it was all nonsense. What was happening was the weather outside was impacting their decision making. Another documented aspect of what things that may affect our decision making that we're not even aware of, right? So if you want to go for an interview, make sure you check the weather before you go. Have you ever heard of seasonal rain or seasonal depression? You ever been to Seattle? Ever been to London? London fog? I lived 6 months in London. Great things, but the weather's not one of them. Having said that, you'll find that this has an impact on us. People have seasonal depression. It's a form of people feeling down, right? Having said that, I'll give you another example. You know, this one's been well studied, right? If you have a legal trial, make sure you check the timing of when you go for that. If you're on the hook and there's a judge who's presiding over the case, make sure you don't go right before lunch. Because it's been found over and over again that judges who are hungry give more severe sentences to people who are defending themselves. It's a real phenomenon. That impacts their decision making. They may not even be aware of it. Today, now they're trying to figure out these things. But we don't live in a world where there's perfect binary decisions that are made in a way that's perfectly aligned. Having said that, there's two domains. Sometimes when we come, and this is what brings me to the main point that I wanted to share with you today, which is this. Sometimes when we come to the realm of religion, sometimes we are looking at purely from what we think is a purely rational, logical perspective. However, that's not how the world works. That's not comprehensive. That's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So sometimes when we come to the Majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and we see things that we're not really accustomed to or used to or we don't feel as comfortable with, we're thinking that's wrong, but in reality, you may find that with difficulty, hardship, and things that we may not understand, there's also a silver lining and a beauty to it. If I ask you that if we divide factors into two, one being aql, one being ishq, one being reason, one being love, love being divine love, ishq haqiqi, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately. What does that mean? What brings you and I year after year after year to the zikr and the majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? Is it logic? Pure logic? Does it make sense on a Monday night? Some people have driven an hour and a half, 2 hours to come here. Does it make sense? Does it logically make sense that I come every single night for 10 nights? Does it logically make sense that I do things? Does it logically make sense for you to go to the mall and drop $1,000 on something? For example, when they market, have you heard of marketing? Have you heard of branding? Have you heard of these advertising? Does advertising use logic? In Europe, they try to use logic. In America, we don't use any logic. It's all feelings, it's all emotions. So Islamic thinkers and philosophers divided this dichotomy into two, and they bifurcated. They said there's aql and ishq. Both are vital. Both are vital. But neither is comprehensive. So now let me explain through some poetry and that I'll unpack with you. The poet says, Be khatar kood pada aatish namrood mein ishq aql hai mehve tamashaye labe baam abhi. Be khatar, fearlessly kood, jumped, pada aatish, fire, Namrud, Nimrod, mein ishq. Who jumped head first into the fire of Nimrod, of Namrud? Louder? Ibrahim. Thank you. Fantastic. That made my day. Ibrahim alayhi salam. So the poet says, he Bekhatar kood pada aatish namrud mein ishq. Ishq, divine love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, jumped head first into the fire of Namrud. What did Namrud do? He had a dialogue, right? The Quran tells us the story of Ibrahim, Father Abraham, who's sacred in Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And so he has a dialogue. And the prophets of Islam, the prophets of Allah, whether they were leading the Christian community, the Jewish community, or the likes, they had a principle, they had a way, they had a method. And their method was, they would try to use reason as much as possible with people. But if they didn't get it, they didn't get it. And eventually, they had to sometimes have other means that God used to help with. For example, Ibrahim has a conversation in the Quran with Nimrod, right? Namrud. And Abraham, they have a conversation. And so he says, Namrud says to Ibrahim, who's your God? Who's your Lord? And he says, my Lord is the one who gives death and life. Death and life, okay. He said, Nimrod, in his arrogance, sometimes you can get God complex. Sometimes if you figure out one thing or you have power, you can think you know everything. So he said, oh, I can do that. Namrud says, I can do that. He said, how can you do that? He said, okay, this guy in the court, they were in a court, the royal court, the king's court. He said, this guy over here, he's on death row. He's supposed to be killed tomorrow. And this guy next to him, he's innocent, hasn't done anything wrong. I'm just going to swap the two. So I can give death and life. And so Ibrahim says, hold on a second. Something's missing here. He said, my Lord, then Ibrahim says, my Lord is the one who brings the sun out from the east and lets it settle in the west. If you're God, then bring the sun out from the west and bring it into the east. That's when Namrud was like, I'm stuck. So then he said, build a fire and we're going to throw and catapult Ibrahim into this fire. Now at that junction, Ibrahim they're building this huge furnace, this huge fire, and they're going to throw Ibrahim into it. Remember, they're upset at Ibrahim because Ibrahim broke their idols, right? When the town went away, he broke their idols and he put the axe that he used around the head of the largest idol and he left it as a sign and he said, look, if you want to know who killed the idols, ask the big one if it can answer to you. Why are you asking me? Those are your gods, right? So Ibrahim used these things to try to get people to think. Another time in the Quran, Ibrahim uses techniques to try to get people to think. Sometimes things are not always as they seem. One time in the Quran, Ibrahim says, this kawkab, this star, Hada Rabbi. Side note, you would talk to Ibrahim and say, Ibrahim, you know, I know, we know that star is not God. It's not your God. You're the prophet of God. Why would you say that? He would tell us, relax, hold on a second. I'm trying to get them to think. He says, wait. He says, Hada Rabbi, this star is my Lord. Because they believed that, some of them. But eventually, as time progressed, the star began to decline. It began to disappear. And as it began to disappear, he said, hold on, that can't be my Lord. That can't be God. My Lord can't disappear. So he's invoking them and provoking them to think. So now coming back to this, eventually, they're saying enough is enough. They said, I can't answer him. Namrud says, the people said we need to get rid of him. He's a troublemaker. And so they say, we're going to put him to death and we're going to put him in a fire. We're going to burn him. And so that's where the poet says, Bekhatar kood pada aatish Namrud mein ishq. So head first, ishq, the love of Allah, jumped head first into the fire. Now, recall in the story, there's a moment in time where Ibrahim is holding this massive catapult that launches him there. And when it launches him towards the fire, the narrations say that Jibreel comes on that while he's in the air, mid-flight, and he's going towards the fire. There's a lesson in there, that's why Allah is telling us this. And when he's going mid-air, Jibreel comes and Jibreel says, Ibrahim, Khalilullah, the friend of Allah, do you need help? Do you need assistance? If your title and your name and you're known as God's friend, what do you do in that situation? If you have a friend, you know what's the old saying? A friend in need is a friend in deed, right? So a true friend, like if you're really close, they would want you to reach out to them when they need you. Vice versa. A true friend is someone you know when you're on the line, when you're stuck, they're there for you. That's not all your followers on TikTok. I promise not all of them are going to show up if you have a flat tire. That's a core group of people who may be your friends, relatives, or people who you're close to, and you have their back, they have your back. So what does Ibrahim do? Jibreel saying, can I help you? If he accepts it, who's his friend? God. What does he say to his friend? God. And if he doesn't accept it, it's also a problem. So he says, yes, I need help, but not from you. Ibrahim's at a different level spiritually. You know, in our world, some people are playing the $1 million game, the $100 million game, the $1 billion game. They're different games of life. Ibrahim's in a different game. If Jibreel comes to you and offers you help, you take the help and run. Ibrahim's a different game. If you're in a situation, Ibrahim saw a dream where he's sacrificing his son, that's for Ibrahim. You tell your kid today, son, beta, I see I'm slaughtering you in my dream. He'll say, Dad, I know a really good shrink. I know a really good psychiatrist. We'll get you checked out. And understandably so. The reality is it applies to one individual, it doesn't apply to everyone. By the way, that's a common theme. You know, the sacrifice of and the ram story is common between Jews and Muslims, for example, right? It's an Abrahamic religion. Anyways, coming back to this, Ibrahim says, Jibreel, I need help. I'm going towards the fire, but not from you. So from who? We all know who. He knows who. Jibreel knows. From God, his friend. And so when that happens, eventually, Jibreel returns, and God, knowing the love that Ibrahim has for him, as his friend, he says that I will deliver him. And the Quran says that Allah told the fire, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامٌ عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Oh fire, become cool and easy upon Ibrahim. And it was cool, and he survived. But let's go back to the line, the couplet of poetry. بے-خطر کود پڑا آتش نمرود میں عشق عقل ہے محو تماشائے لب بام ابھی. Have you heard the Noha? Sometimes you hear Bam Odar Saj Gaye, right? Bam Odar or Bam is terrace. Think of it as a height. Labe Bam is the edge of the terrace. And the poet saying is, Ishq jumped head first into the fire of Namrud, of Nimrod. Aql is standing at the edge of the terrace looking down. Should I stay? Should I go? It's stopped. It's hesitant. It's locked in. It's not moving. Keep this on ice. Second element. Do you know where the word aql comes from in Arabic? You know, like the root words, the origin of words, they tell us a lot about the word sometimes, right? For example, you learn things by where things come from, right? Algorithm comes from, Khawarizmi. We'll get to that in a couple of nights. There are root words for things, right? So when you look at aql, aql comes from the base, and which has many derivatives, but the root of it, it comes from the same root of the word in Arabic for something that you may have seen. Have you ever seen some of those rulers in the Gulf from the Arab belt? They have their traditional attire, right? And sometimes they wear something on their head, and then they wear something that's around it to keep it down. Do you know what that thing's called? The belt type thing that goes around the head? Anyone know? It's a couple of names. I'm looking for one in particular. Yeah, nobody lived in the Gulf, nobody visited? Okay. It's fine. If you're from a Sayyid background, your ancestors are crying in the grave right now. Having said that, in that background, it's called, one of the names for it is iqal. Iqal. Iqal and aql come from the same root. Do you know what iqal, do you know why they used to wear that in the back in the day? One of the reasons? That was your brake as a Bedouin in the desert. What do you mean brake as a Bedouin in the desert? Today, you have your car that you park, you put the brakes on, handbrake, leg brake, whatever it is. But at that time, the main mode of transportation was a camel. Camel doesn't have brakes. So what do? What they used to do was, when they needed to take a break, they needed water, they found an oasis, they needed to eat something, whatever it was, they would stop. And how do they keep this animal also hesitant? He's saying, I'm free, I'm homeward bound, I'm getting out of here. So they would bend the knee of the camel and they would take that aqal and they'd put it around the leg, such that if it ran away, it wouldn't go too far. They could catch it. That's the same root of aql. I'll give you a third example. I have a friend of mine who's done really good in entrepreneurship. They're generational entrepreneurs, right? They've done really well. But his dad is a brilliant entrepreneur and businessman, but he also happens to be a CPA, which is a double-edged sword. So eventually, he had to find his own voice. And he says to his dad, they love each other. Love and agreement are not always the same, right? I love my dad, I respect my dad. I may not agree with everything he says, and vice versa. He may not agree with everything that I say, but we still love each other, right? So, when it comes to this dynamic about disagreement, eventually my friend says, Dad, I'm never gonna tell you my ideas in business and entrepreneurship again. I love you to death, and I respect you to death. And you're an amazing businessman, and you're an amazing entrepreneur, but I'm just never sharing my ideas. I gotta do it on my own. He says, why? He said, Dad, because you're gonna scare the out of me. You're gonna tell me all the ways it cannot be done. It's impossible. You're gonna crunch the numbers. You're gonna say, this is gonna go wrong, this is going to go wrong. And that you have good intent. The reason may be that you don't want me to struggle. But also, by not letting me struggle, you may be setting me up for failure in the long run. Allah says in the Quran, Inna ma'al usri yusra. Another very elegant verse of the Quran that tells you a complete message in just a line. Verily, verily, ma. Inna ma'al usri yusra. Usr is hardship and ease. Yusra. Yusra is ease. Hardship and ease. Verily, hardship, ma'a, ease. Verily, Allah, is it after? Ma'a means with in Arabic. The language is important. So at that junction, Allah says, verily with hardship comes ease. And you may find that the same thing that you thought was a struggle, the same thing that you thought was an obstacle, the same thing that you may have thought was a challenge that God gave you in your life was actually a blessing that He gave you. But you don't know it at that moment in time. And eventually, it teaches you something. For example, it teaches you what you never knew that you had inside. It's through challenges that we realize what we have inside. And you look back and you're saying, I never knew I had the ability to do that. And sometimes the barriers are just here in our minds. The principle from last night's majlis into today's majlis is, when you have Allah on your back, you should not be limited in your thinking. Because you have trust in the ability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deliver you, to make the impossible possible. Provided we put our utmost effort first. And then we leave the things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the keys to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, 100 years ago, not that long ago, we believed as human beings that impossible to run a mile in 4 minutes. Huh? We thought it was impossible. One guy was Bannister. That same year, a dozen other people break the same record. What happened? What changed? It was just a belief here. What you think is possible and what you think is not possible. So now come back this idea of aql and ish. So now all of that, and I'm going to keep it tight here. All of that brings us to this point. There are elements of aql that are necessary in life. There are elements of ishq that are necessary in life. The same reason that you want that really fancy sports car, believe me, it's not aql. Aql will not tell you to buy a depreciating asset, or rather I should say a liability. That sometimes you drive it off the lot, it's already lost 30%, 40%, 50%. There's something else that's motivating you to do that, right? Similarly is our life. Yeah? Aql, wedding rings, right? Wedding bands, right? Try telling your wife, logic doesn't dictate that I should spend more than $100 on the ring. You may not survive through the night. Tell your wife, logically, it doesn't make sense to buy that bracelet or that, I think nowadays the tables are turning. I think the sisters are having to ask the brothers now because the dynamics have shifted and are shifting very rapidly. But what I've been told, our sisters are getting more educated than the brothers, and some of them are earning more. So our sisters, please have mercy on us as the Quran inspires us to have mercy on others. Having said that, it's the domain of ishq. And ishq has different manifestations. So now brings me to the family structure. Ihsan is one of the words. Excellence is one of the themes. Everything you do, you want to have excellence. Rasulullah is in a very famous tradition. The Holy Prophet is in a situation where he is in a funeral of one of the Muslims. And they make a grave for the individual. And when they make the grave, the companions make the grave, and eventually what happens is, while they're giving the final rites of the individual, the Prophet does it. Afterwards, the Prophet eventually himself, who's the leader of everyone, he comes and he starts fixing aspects of the grave. They say, Ya Rasulullah, we'll do it. Why are you bothering? No, don't worry. He said, no, I got it. Don't worry, I got it. And so he started making prayer. He said, Ya Rasulullah, why did you do that? It's a grave. He's going into the grave. There's no point. He's deceased. He's passed. He's going to the next world. And the Prophet said a line, which I want us to remember. He said, if you do something, do it properly. If you do something, do it properly. Don't do it haphazardly. Don't do it like without thinking. Do it in a beautiful way. Do it in an excellent way. Allah uses this term over and over again, ihsan. And I'm trying to get to the root of how important it is to get to the real word. In Italian, there's a proverb that gives an insight. You know, all translation is treason. And I just committed treason because I gave you a translation of an Italian proverb. And the idea is you lose something, you miss something. Lost in translation. Ihsan, Allah says, for example, in Surah Yusuf, when Surah Yusuf is revealed, the entire chapter of Yusuf, Allah says, Ahsan al-Qasas. But sometimes people translate, and that's why you have to be so careful with the translation. There are upwards of 20 translations of the Quran just in English. And still none of them are, and perhaps never will be, comprehensive and perfect. That doesn't mean we don't use them and try them, but Allah said the Quran is Arabic for a reason. So now at that junction, ihsan, when Allah says, we give you the ihsan story of Yusuf. Ihsan, sometimes translators say, means best of stories. But it's a story. A story may be a form of art. So if I put a Van Gogh in front of you, and I put a Picasso in front of you, and I put a Monet in front of you, and I put a Manet in front of you, and I put a, we could go down the line, Sadiqain in front of you, and I go down the line, which one's the best? Yeah, in our modern world, to save taxes and save on expenses, some people put a monetary value on art, right? Because it's feasible, financially it makes sense in our world. But it's truly priceless. So Allah may be saying, I'm giving you one of the most beautiful stories. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a line, and I want us to remember this. Allah is very adamant on Tawheed in the Quran, right? Oneness of God. So what does Allah say? وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah says, I command you to not associate anyone with me. God is saying, God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I command you to not associate anyone with me. And in the same breath, Allah says, so to speak, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and do ihsan to your parents. The commentators on the Quran say the tonality of this ayah indicates something. That God seems to be saying, I do not allow you to worship anyone except me, but if I did, it would be your parents. Why? Because one of the manifestations of God's mercy, God begins every chapter of the Quran, except for one, with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. And He shows us, if you want to see mercy, a glimpse, a glimmer, a flash of my mercy on earth, see it in loving parents. Yes, there may be anomalies. There's always exceptions in every case. But by far and away, that love that Allah has put there is valuable. In fact, if you've known this, Charles Darwin, was about to drain his theory of evolution into the river because he couldn't explain one concept in his theory of survival of the fittest, the theory of evolution and the likes. Do you know what that concept was? He couldn't explain altruism. Why do people do things without expecting something in return? Why does a parent look after their child? Why does a parent, pay for their college? Why do they take them, on ziyarah to Disney or something? Why do they do those things? Why? Why? And he was about to drain it. Later, people came up with reasons as to why they argue, but Perhaps someone was to tell Darwin that God put that love there in the heart of parents. The only people on this planet, life is complex, but perhaps the only people on this planet who want you to exceed them, pass them in their accomplishments are parents. Even siblings, they'll want you to succeed, but not that much. Like just up to my level. Don't pass me up. You want to know what one of the biggest predictors is of your income? Your brother-in-law's income. You can take that to the bank. We live in relativity. If you want to talk about this, there's a philosopher called Rene Girard. By the way, in Islam, risk is not only your bank balance. Risk is also knowledge. Risk is also patience. Risk is also X, Y, and Z. We live in an extremist world. Extremists are not only terrorists. We're also extremists. What kind of extremists are we? I'll give you an example. I've been to Australia. Have any of you been to Australia? There's some brothers that I met, really good friends of mine. They came from America and they started working in Australia. They worked in the Gulf and they started working in Australia. I said, how was your experience working there versus here? He said, Sayyid, Doc, man, first week I got called in and I had disciplinary action on me in the first week. I said, what? He said, they said, you're working too hard and you're working the team too hard. So what are you talking about? I'm putting in like normal 40, 50, 60 hours. That's normal. He said, no, we don't work a fraction above 35 hours a week. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, mate? They think we're extremists when it comes to work, and we are. There's a philosopher and a thinker named de Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis in English, Alexis in French. He wrote a book 200 years ago called Democracy in America. And he came as a Frenchman, right? Interesting. As strange as the French are, it was critiquing American society. There may be a few things that we can critique, that we can look at in ourselves that need to be critiqued. Sometimes we just look at others and we say they need to be fixed. One line of spiritual poetry that will help you. Umr bhar ghalib यही भूल करता रहा उम्र भर गालिब यही भूल करता रहा धूल चेहरे पे थी और आईना साफ करता रहा. Ghalib's the poet. He says, I made a mistake my whole life. What was the mistake? I had dust and dirt on my face, but I was cleaning the mirror. Doesn't matter how much you clean the mirror, it's not going to fix the dirt that's on your face. In society, we say the Imam Barga, the community, the masjid's wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong, that person's wrong. But we sometimes don't look at us, ourselves. A poet says an interesting line. His style is different, but just take it for what it's worth. He says, "Aapke haath mein khud apna girebaan hoga. Aap jhaake to sahi apne girebaanon mein." That you're going to hold your own color. Why? If you know what you did, if you know what error you made. Sometimes we make errors knowingly, sometimes we make them unknowingly. Anyways, de Tocqueville said in his book, Democracy in America, he says, America is a strange place. He said, everything in America, and by the way, we won't even be able to figure this because to us it will seem so natural because we're a fish in water and this is the type of water we're in. He said, everything in America, he said this 200 years ago, everything in America is based on money. He gave an example. He said, even the books that people read are judged by how many copies they sell. I understood this when I read the reading lists of some of the elite of American society. And believe me, they don't read books that you and I read. I'll give you an example. Gates, whatever you... By the way, when I mention Gates or Buffett or any of these guys, I'm not giving religious or family advice from any of them. That would be a disaster. I'm only giving advice in that domain that they were in, either technology or finance or whatever. There's only one Imam Ali. There's only one prophet who's excellent in every area. There's no others. Having said that, he read a series of books that are voluminous on energy. And the author himself says, I think Gates is the only person who's read my books cover to cover. All of them, nobody else. Because they're so dry, dull, bland. For example, there are books that can teach you about things about the world that you never fathomed. that you never knew. And so, what the common populace may read may not tell you much about society at all. It may tell you how dilapidated society is. It may tell you how broken society it is. It may not tell you anything. So, sometimes truth is with minority, and the Quran teaches us this. So now, coming back to all of this, sometimes you have to think through things again. I say this not for you as much. Believe me, there are some people who follow my lectures, and they watch my lectures. Often, they get the most out of it when they watch it 3 times. I don't know why, but there's a lot of content. And I'm thinking about these things. Sometimes I don't realize things. Having said that, the point being, at this junction, when Allah says do ihsan as an example to your parents, one manifestation of that is the love that there is. Rahim, the womb in Hebrew and in Arabic. In Hebrew it's rahim, in the concept of Arabic, in the language of Arabic it's rahim. The womb that a mother carries a child in is derived from the same rahmah or mercy of God. That's a vessel for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. So when it comes to this, Allah wants us to respect and revere our parents, because Allah is showing at one level, the same way that if we can be arrogant towards our parents, then what's stopping us from being arrogant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The same way that Allah gave some people everything, such as Fir'aun, such as Namrud, but they became arrogant and they began to think, I got this all on my own. And if I don't have the humility with my own parents to say that, this was their du'as, and by the way, this is not just our phenomenon. This is something that was understood in American society. Abraham Lincoln, the president during the Civil War of the United States, they say he failed in every domain of life. That's what they say. They say he was a postman, he failed at that, a lawyer, he failed at that. The only thing that he was really good at, they say, was being president. And what did he attribute his success to? He said, was it my hard work, my effort? No. He said, I always remembered the prayers of my mother. They clung on to me wherever I went. So even he argued that it was his mother's du'as, her prayers that helped him achieve what he achieved. What if I told you the keys to your du'as, your aspirations, your desires in this world and in the next are your effort, your intent, your niyyah, your effort, and the du'as, primarily of your parents, that may be able to push you over the edge to achieve what you achieve. There's a moment in time we're told, Imam Baqir, a man comes to him and says, Ya Rasulullah, I'm having big problems in life. Big problems. And so the Imam asks him a series of questions. He says, what's going on? XYZ, this reason, that reason. And the Imam asks him a question. He asks him, are your parents alive? He said, no, my father passed away. How long? Some time ago. He said, my mother, your mother, when did she pass away? 3 months ago. He said, that's it. That's it. The difficulties that you're facing in life right now are because of your mother. He said, my mother? What do you mean? He said, no, your passing of your mother, her leaving. It's not that these issues are coming today. What's happening is those issues, those problems were coming from before. But the prayers of your mother were acting as a shield to protect you. That shield's not there anymore. Having said that, in our world, and we'll come to this in the next few nights, which is our world there are societies that are communal and there are societies that are individual. In philosophy, in psychology, and both have pros and cons. But our society in America is very individual-centric. And there's many pros of that. You can achieve your maximum potential as an individual, but there are big costs of that as well. The benefits are clear. Today, a beautiful aspect of individualism is if I have a lunch meeting at work and I eat halal or someone eats vegan or they'll accommodate you in the most beautiful way. That's beautiful. You go to China or some other communal countries, they'll be like, we have dal chawal, you like it? Welcome. If you don't, there's the door. You go with whatever's there. But they also have benefits there. They may have better family structures in some sense. They may have other things that we are maybe lacking here. Having said that, the family structure is very important. So now brings me to the next element of the equation. In that, we need to make sure we reestablish families to be firm. to be strong, because they're the foundational element that gives success to society at large. That means the next level of after respective parents is also the institution of marriage. I'm going to give you a lesson. I get asked about this a lot. I don't have it figured out myself. I have a PhD in engineering, but if you ask me to figure out my wife's brain, it'll be very difficult, and vice versa. She would tell you the opposite. She's way smarter than I am. She probably couldn't figure out my brain either. So a good lesson that I'll tell you right now is this. You've heard of the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated? I'm going to tell you to exchange that for the platinum rule. Don't treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Because there's a big difference. I can sit here and talk in front of 1,000 people, and I can go on for 2 hours. I don't like hearing my voice. I just have connections in my brain that I share. That may not be everyone's cup of tea. But someone here may be a great leader. Someone here may be a great executor. Somebody here may be a great entrepreneur. Somebody may be a great something, and I have no bearing, and I have no competition with that person because I can't even compete with them in that area. That's their gift from God. So, I may treat someone, you're a husband, wife, spouses, and maybe let's say the husband's very social, and he thinks he gets married to his wife, and he thinks that the same way he likes to be treated is the same way she wants to be treated, so he likes to be part of the conversation, maybe in the center of the conversation. And he says to his wife, I want you to be the center of the conversation. She's an introvert, or she's someone who's not social, or she doesn't like that. She has a lot of depth in her personality, in her being, in her thoughts, in her mind, but it's not a people thing, not a numbers thing. Similarly, there's a book that I invite you to read that may align, it's actually in Christian basis, but the principle is important, and you may find a similar principle in Islam, and that is, the book's called Love and Respect. Both are vital when it comes to marriage. Both are vital for husband and wife. A wife must be loved and respected, and a husband must be loved and respected. However, it may be that the primary trait for each of them is different. It may be that the primary necessity of a man is respect, then love. And for a sister or a woman or a lady, the primary may be love and respect, hand in hand. But love first, then respect. That does not mean, please don't misunderstand me, that both don't need to be respected. They both need to be respected. But what they focus on as emphasis may be different. And so when the Quran says, "Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa," for example, that men are the guardians of women, it may not be in the sense that you and I think. It may be that Allah says that they have a responsibility, and it doesn't mean that one's above the other. It's just Allah's given that basis. And sometimes, and you find this, you can read a lot of advice on this as well. One thing that you find in the relationship with the Ahlul Bayt is they had tremendous love and compassion and understanding for one another. Bibi Fatima and Imam Ali were completely aligned. If the story of Mubahila teaches anything, it was absolute alignment. If the stories of their lives teach us anything, it was absolute alignment. If the story of Bibi Khadija and Rasulullah teaches us anything, absolute alignment. So now as people, we need strong fathers and strong mothers. We need a strong marriage. We need strong families in order to elevate our communities. And so what that means is where we follow a tradition where there are great leaders such as the likes of Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad, Imam Ali, Imam Hussein, we also have a dynamic right in parallel with them where we have Prophet Muhammad, Imam Ali, Imam Hussein. In parallel, we have Bibi Khadija, Bibi Fatima, and Bibi Zainab. So we have role models on both sides. The dynamic is beautiful. At the same time, when it comes to this, we need to have a system of understanding that some people have pros, some people have cons, some people have things that are strengths, some people have weaknesses, and we're always working on something. Remember this tradition, it will go very far. I hold this close to my heart, which is Man arafa nafsa arafa rabbah. The one who understands themselves, ma'rifah, cognizance. The one who understands themselves understands their Lord. What? How? How can the finite understand the infinite? How? But you may find that you and I, we hardly know ourselves at all. We know ourselves at a very superficial level. And if we know ourselves at a very superficial level, we sometimes have no clue about the next person, our spouses, our loved ones, our family members. Sometimes you just ask why, sincerely, and you'll understand the reason why someone did something is very different than what you imagined. And so what I mean by that is, you'll find that understanding that is very important. Women and our sisters are vital to our success. In fact, some people ask the question, the Quran, when you read the Quran, why is it that 124,000 prophets, all of them men, no women? Some scholars have given answers to these. And one of the answers that scholars have given is that although he did not make them prophets, number one, he made them mothers of prophets. That's equivalent. But you may find that if you read the Quran honestly, he gave them perhaps even one step above this. That not only are women mothers, but they are also they're not prophets, but they are the protectors of prophethood. They are the protectors of nubuwwat. How? That brings me to the verse that I recited at the beginning, which was, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ. There's a situation where Fir'aun is committing infanticide. He is killing young males in alternative years because he has heard that there's going to be one who rises and takes over his kingdom. And so there's a moment when the enemy or the opposition and the forces come to the house of Musa, and his mother is in a situation where what does she do? And the Quran says, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَرْضَعِيهِ. The question is, does Allah give wahi or inspiration to anyone except a prophet? Yes. Allah gave inspiration to the mother of Musa to release the child into the river. The biological mother of Musa releases the child in the river. On the other side, there's an adopting mother waiting for the child Musa. And of all the people, Asya, the wife of Fir'aun. And she takes the child as her own, and he grows up, Musa grows up in the house of Fir'aun himself. He's looking around the whole town to kill children, and it's in his own house that Musa is rising. Protectors. Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam protected Isa. And you can go down the list. Even Rasulullah. You know, there was a time in the early days of Islam when Rasulullah was there, the early days of Islam, they used to hurt Rasulullah a lot. And the Prophet is a miracle in himself. The broadness of chest that he had, of understanding. Poet says, "Ye hikayat hai koi aur na koi afsana. Ye hikayat hai koi aur na koi afsana." Ahmad Nadeem Qasimi. "Ye hikayat hai koi aur na koi afsana. Sang baron pe tera abre dua ban jana." Sang baron pe. This is not a story or a fairy tale that you became a cloud of mercy on those people who were pelting you with stones. Rasulullah used to go to Taif and he used to invite people to Islam, and they used to pelt him with stones. And Jibreel would come, "Ya Rasulullah, do you want us to take care of them for harboring you?" He said, "No, forgive them, for they don't know." And he used to pray for their mercy. That mercy is something that Allah wants us to tap into. Because if anyone, Allah loved the Prophet, He loved Prophet Ibrahim, but He loved Prophet Muhammad more than anyone. And it's His closest one. And one of the aspects of the love of God on earth is Rasulullah. And it's very important to keep that in mind. So now, at this junction, when I come to this point, the take-home message with respect to the families is that we need to have a balance. So the women are very important. In fact, even if you go to the movement of Imam Zaman, we have narrations that say that of the 313 commanders of the army of Imam Mahdi of the Imam, 50 of them, according to some narrations, will be women. And they will be in very important roles. In fact, we have the names of some of them. For example, the daughter of Rushayd al-Hajari. Rushayd al-Hajari was one of the people who was killed because of their love of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And they cut off his limbs and his tongue, and his daughter took him back home on her back. Another one is, that's Qanwa, the daughter of Rushayd al-Hajari. And there's others who are there as well, and they're in name. You'll find them throughout the books. 9 of them have been named by name. So they're extremely vital. By the way, and now including, if I am for pro-women's rights, as all Muslims are, that does not mean I'm anti-men's rights. You with me? These are not mutually exclusive. And I'll say that we need to look after our family structure. I'll give you one story and we'll go to Masaib, inshallah. The Ahlul Bayt showed us how to have love and compassion for one another. Believe me, Allah created us for something. I can guarantee you one thing. God did not make you and I to fight each other. I can guarantee you that. Allah did not create you and I to fight anyone else, and He did not create us to fight our loved ones. Yes, maybe the force, maybe evil, maybe, but that's not our purpose. I met a doctor in Florida, and she was older, she was towards retirement, and she said, I want to share something with you. Because she knew I was like, I meet people and So anyways, she said, you guys have a big problem in your community that no one's talking about. By the way, she's not Muslim, she's not even, Asian or anything like that. She's Hispanic. And she said, the amount of pressure that brown men in America face, if anyone else felt that pressure, they'd crack. Any other man in America would crack. I said, what do you mean? She said, they have to make their parents happy, their in-laws happy, their kids happy, their neighbors happy, and nobody asks them, are you happy? And I said, how do you know that? Where do you get that from? I said, in med school, she said, from med school, she said, I was a senior, and younger ones who were in the first year or second year would come in confidence and say to her, tell their problems. And she said, you're dealing with this? What's going on? That needs to be taken very seriously. If you're looking at the trends of American society, of what's happening to men, being compassionate to women does not mean not being compassionate to men. We need to understand that these are all elements that make the family strong together. The story of Ibrahim is not complete without the story of Ismail, his son, but it's definitely not complete without the story of Hajara. The stories of the prophets are not complete without the women, but the stories of the women are also not complete without the men's. It's something that leads to the sum of the parts is greater. When they come together, it's greater. That needs to be understood about family, where love, compassion, and all of these things come to fruition. Having said that, the take-home message is, as the future of our community, we need to figure out how can we make these programs such that they improve the quality of life of our families. That when we get up here, right now, and I'm going to expand on this next few nights, but remember this point. And the point is this. People ask me, why aren't people coming to the Imam Barga? Why aren't people coming to the Hussainiya? Why aren't people coming to the masjid? Alhamdulillah, Muharram time we get some people, but why aren't they coming throughout the year? Well, sometimes you have to understand the opposite thing. Well, why do people spend their days and nights awake working on their applications to the Ivy Leagues? Why do people spend days and nights preparing for their tests? Right? Why do they spend time, going to supplemental education and all of these things in order to get to these places? Their actions are telling you something. Their actions are telling you the value that's therein. The actions sometimes in our communities are telling us that people may not be deriving value from the programming. And so someone may say, what can I do about it? Well, the reality is, right now, there's a zero-sum game. You know zero-sum? In game theory, in business school, one person wins, one person loses. Not all games in life are like this. There are non-zero-sum games. There's multi-sum games. But in a zero-sum game, one person wins, one person loses. And right now, the zero-sum game in our communities is between work, life, school, and the mosque, and the Imam Bara. And who do you think's winning? But what if I told you we could reframe this? And what if people would say, I don't have time for the Masjid the Imam Barga because I have X, Y, and Z other stuff to deal with in my life. But rather we got to a point that people say, no, I have to come to the Imam Barga because of it, I have all these other things going in my life. I am succeeding in work, in school, in life, because of the inspiration that I get at the mosque. Because of the inspiration that I get from the Quran. Because of the inspiration that I get from the Ahlul Bayt. That's a different paradigm. Right now, it's not like that. And that needs to change. And when we do change that, you'll find that people, you won't have to ask anyone to come. People will come in droves. You won't have to worry about funding and fundraising. You wouldn't have to worry about anything because people will say, the value I'm deriving is so much. But sometimes you have to look at what's pulling people in. Today, the incentive is different. I'll leave it here. We'll unpack it the other nights. I'm not interested in ticking the boxes. We live in a tick-the-box society. Thursday night, Friday, we have to check the boxes. Check the box, Dua Kumel, Yasin, lecture, blah, 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 ziyarat. All sacred, all important. But that checking the boxes may not change your life and revolutionize your life. If we take a couple of minutes extra, which I have been, and I apologize, and I'm going to keep it tighter, my mindset is not. Organizers should have the mindset that it should be on time. But their problem and my problem are different. We have a conflict of interest sometimes. My interest is changing lives. My first and foremost. I'm talking to myself before I'm talking to anyone here. Nonetheless, tonight we take our hearts and our minds to the Ahlul Bayt. It's the nights of the Ahlul Bayt, and tonight we wish to commemorate one of those people who has a very high spiritual position. If you go to the Arab belt, they say there are 4 Babul Hawaij, people who you can ask for dua, who are a gate of mercy, that Allah has given them a maqam. That if you ask dua to Allah from them, or by virtue of them as a means, Allah will accept it. One, they say, is the 6-month-old of Imam al-Hussein, Aliyun al-Asghar. The other, according to them, is Abbas ibn Amir al-Mu'minin, Hazrat Abbas. The third, of course, is Imam Musa al-Kadhim, alayhi salam, the 7th Imam, who, by the way, not only Shias, Ahl Sunnah scholars, such as Imam al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i is not a Shia, of course, right? Imam Shafi'i, as a Sunni scholar, said, the grave of Musa al-Kadhim is a proven elixir to illnesses, a proven antidote to illnesses. And the fourth, according to some, if you go to Iraq in particular, they call him the ambassador of Imam Hussein, Muslim ibn Aqil. And they say when our dua is not accepted, we say, oh, ambassador Imam Hussein, take our message to Imam Hussein, and by virtue to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This Muslim, although he was not physically in Karbala, he was perhaps the first martyr of the movement of Karbala. And not only that, he gave everything. You know, the difficulties that may be there, Muslim and his family gave everything. According to narrations, Muslim was married to the sister of Abul Fadl Abbas, Hazrat Abbas. They not only gave themselves, they not only sacrificed themselves, they also sacrificed their children. 2 before Karbala and 2 in Karbala. So it's as if they gave their whole progeny and everything they had left. But they lived immortal. Ajrukum ala Allah. Muslim, at one moment he's in Kufa, and he has the whole city behind him, but then there is a pressure from the Umayyads. They change the ruler, they change the governor of Kufa, and they begin to use tactics of intimidation, of trepidation. And eventually what happens is they besiege the whole city, and they put a bounty on the head of Muslim. Eventually, Muslim falls onto some stairs and he is in a state of thirst. And when he is in a state of thirst, eventually there comes a moment where an elderly lady comes out of the house. She sees a man who is on the steps and she notices this man and she says, "Oh man, why are you on my steps? Don't you know there's a curfew in town? Don't you know no one can be out at this hour? You need to make sure you go away from here. They will come and they will hunt you." He says, "Oh lady, oh respected elderly lady, what is it that I can do? Where should one go who does not have a home? Where should one go who does not have a home? I have no place to go. She finds out eventually that this is Muslim. She says, I will give you a safe haven in my home. But eventually, her own family and others, there was such pressure that the news reached that there is an individual who is in the house of this lady and it's Muslim. The enemies come and they besiege him. Muslim says, my dear lady, you've given me a place to stay, but I cannot put you in trouble's way. I must make sure that I come out. He comes out. Muslim ibn Aqil fights the enemy, and in fact, they do treachery, and they say that, okay, when there's so many of the other men, and Muslim ibn Aqil is fighting all of them, there comes a moment where they say, oh Muslim, throw your sword, we will throw our swords, and then we will not attack you. Muslim says, do I have your word? They say, you have our word. At that moment, Muslim stops and he throws his sword. They pick up their swords and they attack. He says, this is the first treachery. He was a man of principle. They took Muslim and they took him to the governor's palace. At that junction, Muslim is in a state of thirst. The narrations say they brought water in front of Muslim. And when they brought water in front of Muslim, at that junction, the blood, because they had struck Muslim, the blood began to fall into the water. He was noticing it, and every time the blood fell into the water, he said, perhaps I am not meant to drink water. Perhaps I am destined to not drink water. Ajrukum ala Allah. They give the call out and they say that we will throw him from the Darul Amara. They take Muslim and they throw him from the Darul Amara. And at that point, the governor's palace, and when he's falling towards the ground, at that moment in Kufa, this is Muslim. From the other side, Imam Hussein is making his way towards Karbala, and when he's making his way, at that point, he pauses. He pauses and he says, he points out and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Muslim. The companions, the family, Abbas and others, they say, oh Imam Hussein, why is this salam at this time to Muslim? The Imam says, look between my fingers. They see the scene of Muslim falling towards the ground. He is the companion, the comrade, the cousin, the loved one of Imam Hussein. He gave his life, but the story doesn't end there. Ajrukum ala Allah, you'll find that there is a element in the zikr of the Ahlul Bayt that is beautiful. You'll find that there's an element, even in these tears, there is a beauty. You'll notice that it allows us to relieve some of our sorrows, our difficulties. The story of Muslim doesn't end. Why? Because afterwards, there is the story of the children of Muslim. 1 year after they killed Muslim, the children went into hiding. When these two boys, the young ones, roughly 9 and 10 years of age, when they went into hiding, eventually they were caught by a la'een, wretched man by the name of Haris. And this Haris took the sons of Muslim ibn Aqil and he took them towards the riverbank. And when he took them towards the riverbank, because there was a bounty on the heads of these two children, Ibn Ziyad had said that whoever brings me these two children, I will pay a reward. He said, whoever brings me the head of these two children. At that junction, he takes these two children, and when he takes these two children, the narrations say that he wants to sever the heads of these two children. And when he wants to sever the heads of these two children, he takes one of them. The other brother says, no, I won't allow you to do this. Make sure you take me first. The other brother says that no, take me first. He first even tells the children, he tells the younger one, remove your shirt so I can do what I need to do. Do you know what this young one said, the son of Muslim ibn Aqil, the younger one? He said, I don't know how to remove my shirt. Whenever I needed to change my clothes, my mother would help me. She's the one who helps me. This is how young he was. At that junction, when this happened, the two brothers, they said, I will go first. If he's going to take our lives, I will go first. The poet Dabir captures this moment in 2 lines. In what he says, एक हश्र बपा हो गया खंजर के तले पर, एक हश्र बपा हो गया खंजर के तले पर, भाई ने गला रख दिया भाई के गले पर. He says that it was the end of the world at the tip of a blade. One brother put his neck on the head of the other brother. When he separated these two children and he threw their bodies into the river, he brought the heads back. The narrations say that when he brought these two, they looked like moons. Their beauty was such that they looked like moons. Do Do you know what the narrations say? A stone-hearted person like Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, when he saw the heads of the two children, he would stand up and sit down, stand up and sit down, stand up and sit down. And he would say, how could you kill these two beautiful children? Such that he was saying that maybe I didn't think what he was arguing, that how could someone have a wretched heart to kill them? Do you know what he said? He said, I want you to behead this man Haris the same way he beheaded these children. At that junction, there comes a moment in time where they take Haris to that same place. And at that junction, when they take him to that same place, they take him where he slaughtered the children. Azadaro do jumle zahmat tamam kehte hain कि जब हारिस को वहां लाया गया तो जमीन पर वो निशान थे. क्या निशान थे? देखने वालों ने देखा कि जमीन पर तिफलाने मुस्लिम के एड़ियां रगड़ने के निशान मौजूद थे. खुदा जाने कि ये बच्चे कैसे ज़िबा हुए इतने कम सिन में. शायर ने अजीब जुमला कहा, मैंने खत्म किया, याद ज़ैनब को जो अब्बास के बाजू आए, देर तक आंखों में बेसाख्ता आंसू आए, और बढ़ के लहरों ने कदम चूम लिए बच्चों के, बढ़ के लहरों ने कदम चूम लिए बच्चों के. चांद मुस्लिम के जो कूफे में लबे जू आए, चांद मुस्लिम के जो कूफे में लबे जू आए. सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या रसूल अल्लाह, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या अमीर अल-मुमिनीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैकी या फातिमत अज़-ज़हरा सय्यदत निसाء आलमीन, सल्लल्लाहु अलैका या हसन अल-मुज्तबा. अस्सलामु अलल हुसैन व अला अली इब्न अल-हुसैन وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. ماتم حسين يا حسين حسين.
حسین یا حسین عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے. 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 جب شام و سحر فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے. جب شام و سحر فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے. عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے. عباس زمانہ تجھے روئے. درہ لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے. درہ لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے. کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے. کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے. عباس تیرا حق نہ تجھے روئے. جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاشا جواں کا. جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاشا جواں کا. شے اسے گھری اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے. شے اسے گھری اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے. عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا تو سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے مشکیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے مشکیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے جا جا کے کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے جا جا کے کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار حضرت عباس علمدار علمدار لشکر شبیر کا سالار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس ہبہ وفا عباس خلافت جیسے علی حیدر کرار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار ایسا نہ سالار دوبارہ ہوا ایسا نہ سردار دوبارہ ہوا کیسے جری شاہ کے لشکر میں تھے ایسا نہ جرار دوبارہ ہوا میدان میں جمع رہا میدان میں جمع رہا آدم میں دتا رہا دیکھا نہ ایسے کوئی جیدار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار حضرت عباس علمدار علمدار لشکر شبیر کا سالار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس دار عباس علمدار حضرت عباس علیہ السلام جتنا بڑھا نام ہے ویسا ہی کام کتنا بلند آپ کا مولا مقام آپ کے مشہور ہے سارے امام دل دل میں بسا ہوا گھر گھر میں سجا ہوا دل دل میں بسا ہوا گھر گھر میں سجا ہوا پاک علم اور علمدار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار حضرت عباس علمدار علمدار لشکر شبیر کا سالار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار یا حسین
زیارت